My sister toasted stolen $20,000 at my mom's birthday, so I triggered fraud probes, froze accounts, and ended my own family. At my mom's birthday, my sister raised her glass smirking. Thanks for the $20,000 loan. Consider it an early inheritance. My parents laughed, adding, "You are always so generous." I just smiled, sipped my drink, and sent the final email. They came home the next day to find their mortgage had mysteriously doubled. My sister's car was repossessed, and my parents' bank accounts were frozen. But it was just a beginning. It was my mother's birthday, and she had insisted on one of her classic over-the-top family parties. My sister Lisa clinked her glass with a polished fingernail and flashed that flawless smile she perfected for every sorority function back in college. "Thanks for the $20,000 loan," she said, flashing that practiced pageant-perfect smile. "Consider it an early inheritance." There was a brief, stunned silence before my parents burst out laughing. My mom dabbed at her eyes as if she had heard the funniest thing in years. Dad tapped her on the shoulder and leaned back in his chair, clearly proud of his golden child. I just smiled, let the ice clink in my glass, and took a slow sip. I looked around the table. A few relatives exchanged curious glances. A couple even gave me impressed looks as if I were some sort of financial savior. The thing was, I had never given Lisa that money. I had not loaned her a dime, but I had found out just a few weeks earlier that she had stolen it. I discovered it the hard way, a letter from my bank confirming a $20,000 personal loan supposedly taken out in my name. The loan had been approved 3 months earlier, and the funds had already been wired. At first, I thought it was some kind of mistake, but a few hours of digging through my credit report and a long phone call to my bank's fraud department revealed the ugly truth. Lisa had forged my signature, used my social security number, and even faked my consent on the paperwork. She had even gone so far as to log into my online banking with the password she must have stolen from my notes years ago. It was a betrayal that went deeper than I could admit. But the part that really hurt was how unsurprising it felt. When I confronted my parents, they brushed it off. My mom, her nose already back in a glossy magazine, barely looked up. "You must have forgotten," she said, turning the page. "You are always so generous to your sister." Dad did not even bother to apologize. He just chuckled and mumbled something about family, helping family. I realized then that I was done being the forgotten son, the one expected to sacrifice, without thanks, the one always asked to be the bigger person. They had built Lisa up to be the star of the family, the precious daughter, the one who could do no wrong. But I was tired of playing my part in their little fantasy. As Lisa held up her glass, basking in her moment of smug triumph, I pulled my phone from my pocket, the screen already opened to a draft I had been perfecting for days. I hit send. The emails I just unleashed were the first in a long line of carefully crafted mayhem. They would reach the right people within hours, the kind of people who asked hard questions and did not use family loyalty as an excuse. When my parents and Lisa returned home the next morning, the first shock hit. Their mortgage payment had mysteriously doubled overnight, a technical error that would leave them scrambling for answers and deplete their savings for weeks. Lisa's prized Audi, her baby, the one she had proudly shown off at every family gathering, had vanished from the driveway. It was already halfway to the auction block, thanks to a quiet repossession triggered by a mispayment that, as it turned out, had never been missed but flagged by the bank I tipped off. And in perhaps the cruelest twist of all, my parents' bank accounts had been frozen as part of a fraud investigation following an anonymous report of unauthorized transactions using their son's stolen identity. Of course, this was only the beginning. I had plans months in the making, and I was not going to stop until they realized exactly what they had turned me into. The morning after my parents' party, I got a call from Lisa. I let it ring until it went to voicemail, then another and another. After the 6th try, she finally gave up. A few minutes later, a series of texts came through, her tone shifting from confused to panicked. I threw my phone on the couch, ignoring the vibration as I made my coffee. I wanted her to stew in it a little longer. I had time. This was a long game, and I was going to enjoy every step of it. Later in the afternoon, my grandfather called. I paused when I saw his name on the screen. Unlike my parents, my grandparents had always been in my corner. They had helped me pay for college, taught me the value of hard work, and never made me feel like an afterthought. I hesitated, then picked up the phone. "John," he said, his deep, calm voice cutting through the line. "We need to talk." He did not sound angry, just concerned. I could picture him probably sitting in his favorite chair on the back porch, rubbing his temple the way he always did when the family got too dramatic. I agreed to meet him and my grandmother at their house the next day. When I arrived, my grandmother was waiting on the porch, her kind eyes a little sharper than usual. She led me into the kitchen, where the smell of fresh coffee and cinnamon rolls reminded me of the summers I had first spent there as a child. My grandfather sat at the table, a manila folder in front of him. He wasted no time. "What is going on, son?" I took a deep breath, my mind flashing back to the moment Lisa had raised her glass, that smug, entitled grin on her face. I explained the loan, the forgery, and the years of being the family doormat. I told them about the confrontation, the dismissive wave of my mother's hand, the way my father barely looked up. They listened without interrupting, their faces hardening with each detail. When I finished, my grandfather pushed the folder toward me. I opened it, my eyes scanning the neatly organized pile of documents, copies of emails, bank statements, and even some surveillance footage of Lisa at a bank branch. We had a feeling something was wrong, my grandmother said quietly, her eyes glowing with a fire I had not seen in years. "Your sister has been getting away with too much for too long, and your parents have let it slide." My grandfather sat back and crossed his arms. "We are not going to stand by and let them drag you through this. We have a plan, but you have to be willing to see it through." I nodded, the weight of their support sinking in. I had not realized how much I needed it until this moment. "First," my grandfather said, tapping the folder, "we are going to make sure that $20,000 does not just disappear into Lisa's purse. If your parents want to ignore that, fine, but the law will not," my grandmother added. "And do not worry about the money. We will help you with the legal side. It is time she learned that actions have consequences." As I left their house that evening, the sun setting behind the trees, I felt a strange mixture of anger and relief. I was not alone in this fight. For the first time in years, I felt the tight grip my family had on me begin to loosen. And that was just the beginning. A few days after my meeting with my grandparents, I got my first taste of how deep this rabbit hole would go. It started with a frantic text message from my mom. "John, please call me. Something is very wrong." I ignored her. An hour later, my father called twice. Then a text. "We need to talk. Call me as soon as possible." I let it sit for a while, savoring the chaos. I knew exactly what was going on. The bank freeze I had set up had finally hit their main checking account, the one they used to pay their bills and fund Lisa's ongoing expenses. It would be a few days before they realized their credit cards had been flagged for potential fraud as well. But the real blow came that afternoon. My sister was finally broke. She showed up at my apartment unannounced, banging on the door like the building was on fire. I considered letting her wear herself out, but curiosity got the better of me. I swung the door open and leaned against the frame as she pushed past me into my living room, clutching her designer handbag like a lifeline. "What did you do?" She spun around, eyes wild, hair ruffled in a way I had never seen before. It was like she had just come out of a nervous breakdown. "My car is gone. Mom and Dad's accounts are frozen. What the hell is going on?" I walked past her to the kitchen and grabbed a beer from the fridge. I took a long sip, then finally met her gaze. "I do not know, Lisa. Maybe you should call the bank. You know, the one where you forged my name." Her face went pale. For a moment, she actually looked scared, like a kid caught shoplifting for the first time. "I did not. She stammered, clutching her bag tighter. "It was just a temporary thing. I was going to pay it back." "With what?" I shot back, my tone sharper now. "Your Instagram ad money. The occasional brand deal." "Come on, Lisa. We both know you do not have that kind of money." Her face twisted, the fear shifting to something colder, more familiar. "Mom and Dad will figure it out," she hissed like a snake backed into a corner. "They always do." I could not help but laugh at that. "Yeah, maybe. But right now your accounts are frozen, your car is gone, and you have a felony fraud case hanging over your head. Good luck with that." For a split second, I saw real panic in her eyes. She took a shaky step back, her mind probably running through her list of Instagram friends. Who could bail her out? She opened her mouth to say something, then seemed to change her mind, and stormed out, slamming the doors so hard it rattled the picture frames on my wall. I took another sip of my beer, the cold bitterness especially satisfying. I knew this was only the opening act. The real storm was still brewing, and Lisa had no idea how bad it was going to get. Because while she was busy trying to figure out how to salvage her shattered finances, my grandparents and I were moving on to the next phase. We had found a lawyer, a real shark who specialized in fraud cases. He was already drafting the paperwork to file charges. and my grandparents had managed to dig up some old business connections that would make Lisa's life a living hell once the suit was filed. And then there was the matter of my parents, the ones who had always treated me like the backup plan, the reliable son who would quietly absorb any blow for the good of the family. They were about to learn a very hard lesson about loyalty and trust. As I sat back on my couch, the phone buzzing with another incoming call from my mother, I felt a dark satisfaction. For too long, I had been the good son, the quiet one, the one they took for granted. But no more. And this was just the beginning of their unraveling. 2 days after Lisa's panicked visit, I received a call from my attorney. He had filed the initial complaint against her for identity theft and forgery, and the paperwork was already in motion to formally press charges. I knew it was going to hit her like a freight train. I was sitting at my desk going through some work emails when I got a message from my grandfather. It was short, just one line. "Turn on the local news." I grabbed the remote and flipped to the local station. My jaw dropped as I recognized the sleek white house on the screen, my parents' house. The camera panned to a pair of sheriff's deputies standing by the front door, their cruisers parked in the driveway, lights flashing. The reporter's voice crackled through the screen, cutting through the hum of my desk fan. Local authorities executed a search warrant at the home of Mark and Janet Wilson this morning. Sources indicate the investigation is related to allegations of financial fraud and identity theft involving a significant amount of money. I sat back, the corner of my mouth twitching into a grin. I had not expected things to move this fast, but I was not complaining. I grabbed my phone and scrolled to the group chat I was having with my grandparents. "Did you have anything to do with this?" I typed, my fingers tapping fast. A moment later, my grandfather replied, "Just making sure the wheels keep turning. Do not worry about it. Keep your head down." I chuckled, feeling a rush of vindication I had not realized I craved. I pictured my parents scrambling around the house, my dad trying to reason with the officers, my mom probably in full meltdown mode, clutching her pearls like some 1950s housewife whose perfect life was suddenly crumbling around her. Then my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from Lisa. I let it go to voicemail, but she immediately tried again. I sighed and finally picked up on the third ring, if only to see what kind of story she would spin this time. "What the hell did you do?" She practically screamed, her voice echoing through the phone's tiny speaker. "I do not know what you mean," I replied, keeping my tone cool, almost bored. "The cops just raided Mom and Dad's house. They are tearing the place apart. They took Dad's laptop, Mom's files." "What the hell, John?" I took a deep breath, savoring the moment. "Maybe you should ask them," I said, my voice calm. "Or better yet, ask yourself. This all started with you. Remember?" There was a beat of silence, just the faint chaotic sounds of my parents' house being turned upside down in the background. I could almost see her standing there, frozen, her world collapsing around her perfectly coiffed head. "You are ruining everything," she whispered, her voice breaking. I smiled and leaned back in my chair. "No, Lisa, you did that. I am just finishing what you started." I hung up and threw my phone on the desk. I knew she would come after me, eventually try to drag our parents into this, spin the story in her favor, like she always did. But this time, I had the upper hand, and I was not going to let go. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed with another text from my grandfather. "Get ready for the next step. We are just getting started." I felt my pulse quicken as the thrill of the hunt washed over me. My grandparents were right. This was just the beginning. And when we were done, Lisa, my parents, and the perfect little world they built around them would be nothing but ashes and broken memories. The fallout from the raid hit like a tidal wave. Within 24 hours, my parents' perfectly manicured lives began to crack. The same neighbors who once chatted over the white picket fences now whispered behind closed blinds, peering out at the chaos. The local news had picked up the story, and their faces flashed across the screen every hour, like the latest episode of a slow-motion train wreck. My father, an executive at a regional financial firm, had been temporarily relieved of his duties pending an internal review. His company had no appetite for scandal, especially one involving potential fraud. My mother, whose social life revolved around charity events and high society brunches, suddenly found herself excluded from her usual circles. Her phone calls went unanswered, invitations dried up, and her so-called friends avoided her like the plague. But the real breakdown happened to Lisa. I had been monitoring her social media and watching her carefully curated life unravel. The posts slowed, then stopped altogether. She made a few half-hearted attempts to control the narrative, vague captions about betrayal and family struggles, but the backlash was brutal. Then came the real blow. I received a call from my grandfather. His voice was firm, but tinged with an unmistakable edge of satisfaction. "It is time," he said, his words coming crisply through the line. "Meet me at the lawyer's office this afternoon." I showed up at the sleek glass-walled downtown building, the kind of place where every office had a view of the skyline and the air smelled of polished wood and old money. My grandparents were already in the conference room, sitting across from a tall, sharp-looking man in an 80s suit. The table was covered with neatly arranged folders, each one labeled with a different legal term that practically screamed Lisa's worst nightmare. My grandfather nodded as I sat down, his expression serious but proud. My grandmother gave me a reassuring pat on the arm, her eyes sharper than I had ever seen them. The lawyer wasted no time in pushing a thick folder across the table. "This is the formal complaint," he said, tapping the cover. "Forgery, identity theft, wire fraud. It is all here. Given the evidence we have gathered, this is not just about the $20,000. We are looking at potential jail time." I opened the folder and flipped through the neatly typed pages. Each paragraph was a nail in the coffin of Lisa's carefully constructed world emails, with forged signatures, bank transfer records, surveillance footage from the bank where she pretended to be me. It was a mountain of evidence. "And the house?" I asked, looking up at my grandparents. My grandfather leaned forward and his eyes steely. "Your parents put it up as collateral for a business loan a few years ago. Now that their accounts are frozen and their credit is in free fall, the bank has already started foreclosure proceedings. They will be out by the end of the month." I felt a tightness in my chest, a strange mixture of satisfaction and something like sorrow. I had once looked up to my parents, tried for years to earn their respect, to be the son they could be proud of. But those days were over. I took the pen the lawyer offered and signed the last line, my signature sharp and deliberate. When I looked up, my grandparents were both watching me, their faces a mixture of pride and quiet relief. "Good," my grandfather said, standing up and clapping a firm hand on my shoulder. "Now let us let the system do its job." As I left the office, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the city streets, I felt a strange calm settle over me. This was the point of no return. My sister's reign as the spoiled, untouchable golden child was over. My parents' blind favoritism shattered. I paused at a crosswalk, watched the steady stream of traffic, and let out a slow breath. This chapter of my life was finally closing, and I felt lighter, free in a way I had not in years. But I still had one last step to take, the real final goodbye to a family that had never really been one. A week after signing the papers, the storm truly hit. My parents' house, the sprawling white colonial with a perfectly manicured lawn, was officially foreclosed. The sheriff's notice, bright and unmissable, was taped to the front door like a neon scarlet letter. Their accounts remained frozen, their credit scores shattered, and the mortgage company had seized their second property, a vacation home in the mountains they loved bragging about at every family gathering. Lisa, stripped of her car and cut off from her main source of financial support, was now living in a cramped apartment across town, desperately trying to rebuild her crumbling influencer empire. She posted a shaky, tear-filled video on Instagram, claiming she was the victim of a smear campaign, but the internet had no mercy. The comments were ruthless, her followers abandoning her in droves. I watched all of this unfold from a distance, keeping my phone on silent as the calls and texts from my parents piled up, each one more frantic than the last. At first, it was just my mom pleading for an explanation, then my dad, his messages growing angrier and more demanding. Eventually, even Lisa tried, her tone swinging wildly between apology and venom, but I ignored them all. Then one evening, I got a call from a number I did not recognize. I almost ignored it, but something made me pick up. "John." It was my mother's voice, raw and strained like she had been crying. I said nothing, just let the silence stretch until she finally broke. "John, please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "We need to talk. Your father, he has lost his job. We are losing the house. They took our accounts. We do not know what to do." I took a slow breath, feeling the weight of years of neglect, dismissal, and silent resentment press against my chest. "Maybe you should ask Lisa for help," I said, my tone flat. There was a stunned pause, the kind where you can almost hear someone's heart breaking on the other end of the line. "John, please." She choked out, her voice, small, stripped of its usual confidence. "We are family." I closed my eyes, my grip tightening around the phone. Family. The word felt bitter in my mouth, a lie I had finally stopped telling myself. "No," I said, my voice cold and steady. "We are not. Not anymore." I hung up, letting the phone drop onto the couch beside me. I sat there for a long time, staring at the city lights outside my window, the distant hum of traffic, a strange, comforting white noise. For the first time in years, I felt free. A few days later, I packed up my apartment, sold most of my furniture, and moved to a new city, one where my family's shadow could not reach me. My grandparents helped me find a place, a small but bright one-bedroom with big windows and a balcony that overlooked a park. Before I left, I stopped by their house one last time. My grandmother hugged me tightly, whispering how proud she was, while my grandfather clapped my shoulder, his eyes shining with a rare, quiet pride. "You did good, kid," he said, as I pulled my bag over my shoulder. "You stood up for yourself. Do not ever forget that." As I drove away, I felt a strange, aching mixture of loss and relief. I knew it would take time to truly move on, to stop looking over my shoulder waiting for the next betrayal. But I also knew I had never let anyone take advantage of me like that again. I was free, and for once, my life was truly my own. It has been about 6 months since I cut ties with my family. I moved to a new city, found a decent job, and started building a life that feels like mine for the first time in years. I have a small but bright apartment, a group of friends who do not come with decades of emotional baggage, and a routine that does not involve walking on eggshells around my parents or bailing my sister out of her latest crisis. The legal situation ended a few months ago. Lisa avoided jail time, barely thanks to a deal that included a mountain of community service, a hefty fine, and a permanent mark on her record. My parents lost their house, their savings, and most of their so-called friends. The last I heard, they had moved into a small rental on the edge of town, a far cry from the 5-bedroom showcase they used to lord over the rest of the family. I thought that was the end of it, that I had finally closed that chapter for good. Then, a few weeks ago, I received a letter from my grandparents. I had not heard much from them since the final court hearing, mostly because I had tried to distance myself from anything that had to do with my old life. But when I opened the envelope, I found a crisp, folded document, a deed made out in my name. It took me a second to realize what I was looking at. My grandparents had bought me a small piece of land just outside the city, a quiet plot near a river with a view of the trees and distant hills. It is nothing fancy, just a few acres and a gravel driveway, but it is mine. There was a note, too, in my grandmother's neat curly handwriting. "John, we know we cannot change the past, but we hope this can be a small part of your future. Build something good here. Create a life that makes you happy. You deserve it. We love you." I sat there holding the paper, staring at the words, until the letters blurred together. It felt like a real final break from everything I tried to leave behind, a chance to start over, to build something without the shadows of my parents and sister hanging over me. I went out there a few days later just to see for myself. It was a cool, overcast afternoon, the kind where the air feels sharp and clean and the sky hangs low and gray. I walked along the property line, the leaves crunching under my boots, the river nearby running swift and cold. Standing there with the wind rustling the branches and the smell of wet earth around me, I felt a peace I had not known in years. I realized that for the first time I was not just surviving, I was living, building, moving forward. So yes, I guess that is it. Thanks for reading, for the support, and for reminding me that it is okay to stand up for yourself, even if it means walking away from the people who are supposed to have your back. Take care, everyone. I hope you all find peace too.